Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Acuña, and on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, I want to welcome you to this, our new interactive webinar. Today we have Sara Davila. Sara is a teacher, materials writer, researcher, and teacher trainer who has worked in a variety of contexts. She is a learning expert at Pearson Education, a World Learning SIT TESOL trainer, and an English language specialist at the U.S. Department of State. And she continues to find time to post free materials on her website, saradavila.com. Here to speak to us today with the presentation, Online Communication and Mediation using the Global Escape of English. So please, let's welcome Sara Davila.
All right. Hello, everyone. How are you today? Hopefully we're doing all right. I noticed that there were quite a few different countries online today in the chat, but I didn't catch every country. So really quickly, I'm going to open up the chat. And today I'll be going in and out of the chat box. So please feel free to type a lot of information in there. In fact, type in what country you're from. I can see if you're from a different country than Costa Rica, if you're somewhere else, I'd love to see. So I've got Ori from Costa Rica. Mark coming in from the US. So Mark, I think I already knew Mark was here. Bisnay from Costa Rica. Hi, Bisnay. It's great to have you on here. Martha, I see a lot of Costa Ricans. I am not surprised. Gabriel, great to have you here. Natalie, I see you too. Wagner from Cartigo, very nice. I don't know how to pronounce Gilupis. I think I'm going to do that incorrectly. Gale Blancos, I can say that one from Veronica. I see you there. Anna, nice to have you on. Hazel, Deandra, Joanna, so many people here. So you'll see there will be a lot of interaction today, and I really look forward to seeing some of the things that you have to say. Hopefully you're here because you're interested in learning more about online communication and mediation and how you can utilize these in your classroom using the global scale of English. So before we begin, I've already pointed out we'll be using this chat box a little bit today. And in fact, we're going to have a bit of an activity going on inside of the chat while I'm doing this presentation today. On the screen, I'm about to show you 3 pictures, and each of these pictures are accompanied by a statement. I'd like you to read the statement and think, which one describes you? Who are you in this series? So I have my 3 pictures. My first person is a deep reader. You really like to read things carefully and talk a lot about the concepts and the information that you're seeing. So maybe you like being in a book club, or perhaps you really enjoy going to your classroom to talk about the information you're about to share with your student. So maybe you're a deep reader and you really like to discuss and share those new ideas. Is that you? I don't know. The second kind of person, an active communicator. You don't mind helping people communicate difficult concepts or helping to support other people when they're not really sure how to say something or what to do. So you really like to add a lot of support. You love working in groups and working with collaboration. Your favorite part of the week is the teacher meeting where you get to discuss and brainstorm ideas with other teachers. Is that you? Are you that active communicator style? And finally, my third style here, this is a knowledge creator. You like to brainstorm. You really like to get into groups together, think through ideas very carefully, share tips, share resources. Your favorite part about going to a conference is honestly going to the coffee hour and the coffee break, where you'll get to see teachers from so many different countries, from so many different parts and states of your own country. So are you a knowledge creator, someone who likes to build new knowledge with your peers? I would like you to take a moment, think, which of these statements reflects you? And once you've made your decision, can you tell me what it is in the chat? And I'm going to read out some names and see who are you. So who are my deep readers? If you're a deep reader, let me see. Oh, I see 3, 2, 1. So Maria, she's definitely a knowledge creator. Jorge, a knowledge creator. Sayam, both. Knowledge, you can be 2 if you want to. Sahiris is a knowledge creator. I see Viviana, also a knowledge creator. Sergio Guerre is a deep reader. Sarcha, another knowledge creator. I see a deep reader. Melissa Gonzalez is a deep reader and she thinks it's awesome. You can be a little bit of all three. These are not mutually exclusive, but there is a bit of an activity going on. So if there's one that really feels good to you, you want to pick that one. So let's see, I'm getting, I see Yendri is an active communicator. Lakeisha, also an active communicator. Sylvia Diaz, a knowledge creator. Great. Paul Cortez, I'm sorry, a deep reader. Mary, a knowledge creator. Great. I'm seeing a lot of different things inside of the chat. So if these statements reflect on you, that's fantastic because we have a small chat activity that we're going to use during my presentation today. So as I am explaining mediation and online interaction, if you have a question and you need to ask for clarification, if I said something too quickly and you didn't catch exactly what I said, if you're a deep reader or someone who pays close attention, please feel free to help answer questions from others in the chat. And please understand, you can ask your questions today in both English or Spanish. So if you're not sure how to say something in English, or you heard me say something, but you're thinking, ¿Cómo se dice en español? How do I say that in Spanish? Just ask in the chat box. Anyone who's a deep reader, please feel free to jump in and answer those questions. But active communicators, knowledge creators, you can also answer questions too. This is an active activity. For concept checking, maybe you already know some of what I am talking about today, and perhaps you would like to give an example of how you're already using mediation inside of your classroom. So if you have ideas or if this inspires you to share a story about your classroom, please feel free to share that and help us create new knowledge and communicate new information with each other. And finally, if you have a problem, perhaps you heard something or an idea I presented and you think, I don't think I can do this in my classroom. I really have problems. Like, for example, I want to use groups, but my students only want to work individually. If you see someone sharing a problem they're having or sharing a story about their challenge, and you love that brainstorming and coming up with solutions, or maybe you know a solution or have some tips or advice, this is your opportunity to help problem solve. I want you to keep going inside of this chat box. I'll be checking back in and out as we go through the session today. However, you're all teachers and you're all working with me to help create new knowledge, share new information, and gain new concepts from our presentation today. So if everybody is ready to go, oh, Gabriela, thank you. My Spanish is very bad. I'm currently learning Spanish as a third language. My second language is Korean. It's very strange. We'll move on. All right. So does everybody have a good idea of what to do today? We're asking questions, answering questions. Erica is ready. All right. I'm not going to wait any longer. When we say we're ready to go. So let's take a moment and let's learn some information about learning, teaching, and assessing language success using mediation and online communication. So before I begin, very quickly, this is a pop quiz. Everyone loves a quiz, especially teachers. Can you tell me, what do you know about the CEFR? Who can tell me anything about the CEFR? What do you know? Answer those questions. I'll read out some answers. Who knows something about the CEFR? What does CEFR mean? When you hear that, when you see those letters, what does it say to you? Oh no, the chat went silent. I always worry when that happens. Oh, there we go. Let's see. I like to see who is the fastest typer too. All right, I see Zari Monge was first with Common European Framework. So you are the #1 top winner for that question. Melissa says it places students into different levels. That's correct. Can anyone name the levels inside of our chat today? Jonathan says from A1 to C2, that's or Helen, she's got the A, B, and C levels there. So if you have not heard of the CEFR before, it is the Common European Framework of Reference, and it does contain the levels of A, B, and C. And I'm going to show some of those to you. Oh, I see Melissa Gonzalez has the perfect answer right there. The levels are A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, and C2, but it actually goes a little bit deeper. If you're familiar with the CEFR, what is fantastic about the Common European Framework of Reference, I believe, as Melissa said, it allows us to describe what students can do inside of the language classroom. And it gives us a consistent language of proficiency, so that if I'm working with students in Costa Rica, I might describe them as beginners. But if I'm working with students in Korea, I might also describe them as beginners. A Costa Rican beginner and a Korean beginner are probably not at the same level. However, by using CEFR levels, I can more accurately describe my classroom. In Costa Rica, I might be working with students who are at an A2 level of ability, which puts them more into a high beginner space. In Korea, I might be working with students who are beginners, but they're more at an A1 level of ability. So they still have a lot to learn compared to my students in the other country. The CEFR, if you learn the scale, can really help you clarify the performance that's happening for your students. You'll also notice that on top of the A levels, A1 and 2, these are our beginner levels, the B levels, B1 and B2, these are our intermediate levels, and our C level, which is our fluency level. B2 has a bit of a break. You'll notice A2 plus, B1 plus, and B2 plus. This helps us understand the transition between these different CEFR levels. So an A2 plus student is a bit bigger than a beginner, high beginner, moving into pre-intermediate. Our B1 student starts around pre-intermediate and moves into upper intermediate. Upper intermediate is the very edge of B2 into advanced until finally you get to B2 plus, which is very advanced and almost ready to go off and speak English all of the time. So the Common European Framework of Reference, it is fantastic. And it was a lot of research to understand how we communicate in English. The Common European Framework of Reference was published in 2001. Since that time, a lot of research has been done, and one of the research projects completed to help expand on the Common European Framework of Reference is the Global Scale of English. How many of you have heard of the GSE before or have been in a presentation where you've learned about the GSE? I want to see some names in that chat box if you've heard of this before. I do a lot of presentations on the Global Scale of English, so maybe you've seen me present before. Marquez, Jonathan's heard. Gabriela says, nope. I appreciate that. Maybe you have no idea, that's okay. I like an honest answer, that's my favorite. Jonathan, Christina Umana, yes. Federico, Evelyn Palacios, no, that's okay. Some of you may be new, and for some of you, this may be a very new thing, and for some, this may not be. But that's okay, I'll give you a quick explanation. Again, you can see here the Common European Framework of Reference and our levels below A1 through to C2. The Global Scale of English is an 80-point scale that is designed to help us get insight into how students make progress in English. It starts at 10, not 0. You're never at a 0 in English or any language. We all have some language skills. So even with English, at the very beginning, you'll start around a 10. The top is 90. This is the end of English, but very few of our students will ever receive a 90. This scale helps us understand difficulty, and it's not a linear scale. So you will never, ever, ever plan your classes to go 10, 11, 12. No. This scale helps us understand challenge and difficulty, so that if I am teaching students who are at a level 30, and I want to introduce a concept or a language objective that is at a level 40 or an A2 plus, I as a teacher can plan how to successfully achieve that objective. There's some other information in this ruler as well, and I want to show you what that is. But before we move on, I want to make my final note, which is that the Global Scale of English is research that was created in collaboration with the Council of Europe. And as part of our relationship and the research that we do, it is a public domain academic research project. So all of the tools and materials you see today are free for you to use, and I'll show you how to get access to everything. Now, I want you to take a look at this ruler. Look at the CEFR and look at the Global Scale of English. We're going to play a bit of a game of find the difference. What is difference between the GSE and the CEFR in this ruler? Can anyone tell me what that is? Who has the very sharp eyesight? Not me these days. All right, let's see. Oh, Zoom, catch up. There we go. All right. So who can spot the difference? What is different between the CEFR section of this ruler and the Global Scale of English section? Can anyone see the difference between those two? All right, Jonathan says the GSE is very detailed. That's correct. I see a lot of little notches. Daniela Blandon is great answer here. Some levels are wider than the others. Did anyone else see that inside of my chat today? Yes, Anna Porras also said that. She says there are different increment levels there. So if you're looking at the CEFR and you're thinking, why are some of these levels different? And why is the GSE so granular? What is happening there? If you've heard me talk about this before, you might know the answer. If you think you know the answer, feel free to reveal my hidden secret in the chat. But I am going to tell everyone while we're talking. So what you're seeing here is time. The Global Scale of English helps us understand how much time it takes to learn English. And that time will change depending on where you're at inside of your English language learning journey. If you're at the beginning or the A1 level of the CEFR, your learning progress is going to happen very quickly. When you're at the very, very beginning of this scale, when you're moving from 10 to 30, this is a very short amount of time. However, the further you go, the longer it's going to take you to make progress. So as you move into the A2+, B1+, and B2 areas, you're going to see that it will take a much longer time to make progress. Many of us, when we describe this, we're familiar with this in the English language classroom. In fact, we even have a word for this. When our students get to a certain point and suddenly they stop making progress. That word begins with a P. Can anyone tell me what it is? I love to have people guess answers if anyone can tell. I'm a classical classroom teacher. I really love my little pop quizzes. So when a student is making very good progress and suddenly they slow down, Geraldine was the first one, Geraldine Zamora S, very good job. She said it is the plateau. So if you've heard of the plateau before, your students are making great progress and suddenly they stop making progress, that's the plateau. And what's happening is the learning hours expand. Your students keep making progress until they come into this A2+ B1 area, and suddenly everything does become more difficult. So the Global Scale of English is designed to help us understand when our students get stuck in that plateau, how do I help them continue to make progress by pushing slowly new challenges at new levels of ability to keep my students moving along in their English language learning journey. So that's a little bit that I think somebody said that was pretty interesting information. And we can actually see this with learning objectives. So on the screen, I apologize. On the screen, you can see a learning objective. This is a Global Scale of English learning objective. As you can see, it's just using a few simple words to describe objects. And all of the learning objectives I'm about to show you are around describing objects. This objective is a speaking objective at an 18, so that places it at A1. And I can probably teach this in 1 week with a little bit of practice and repetition. I can get my students describing objects and colors. This is a fairly simple thing to accomplish with a beginning student. And some of you may have taught this objective before, so how long do you think this would take you to teach using a few simple words to describe objects? Please feel free to share your experience. Now, let me show you what happens as we go through time. I teach my students to describe objects. The next thing I want to work on is teaching my students to describe objects in a basic way. This is more complex. I can teach a basic description, maybe 1 week. Describing objects in a basic way, that might take me 2 weeks, maybe 1 month, with a lot of reinforcement and redundancy, but it will take a longer time. Once my students master that skill, now I want them to learn how to describe things using a limited range of a limited range of expressions. This is much more complicated. As you can see, it's a GSE 35, which places it right here, almost on the edge of A2+. This is going to be quite challenging, and it may take 1 month or even longer for my students to make some progress. But once my students have mastered this skill, now we're ready for the big challenge, getting my students to describe objects, possessions, and products in detail, including the characteristics and special features. This is a very big objective. This could take me months and months to teach. In fact, this may take me almost 2 or 3 months to really get to see perfection and ability to really have that internalization of English, so that I know my students have deeply understood and can do this without having to think or to stress themselves very hard. So as you can see, as we go up the scale, the objectives become more complex. The amount of time it takes to teach becomes longer. So I'm going to check into the chat and just see what we're talking about, right? All right. So, oh, we've got some good questions going on. The CEFR does not assign numbers. That is correct. The GSE numbers are, again, there to help us understand difficulty. So that's really what we're looking at here. And I had someone say, how can we measure our students according to the scale? We're going to talk about that as we go on. And oh, you didn't know about the learning hours. I'm so glad, Helen, that I think that was Helen. Sometimes these disappear. No, Melissa. Melissa says she didn't know about the learning hours. And in fact, if you'd like to learn more about this, I can share our research paper on how long it takes to learn a language. So if you're actually curious of how many hours it takes, I can answer that question. But I'm not going to answer that question today. That's a homework assignment. So you'll have to read that paper at home. So now that we know a little bit about things, I apologize. I have a strange blue line on my screen, and I don't know where that came from. I thought it was on my PPT. Apparently, my computer is having a strange error. So hopefully it's not too distracting. I do apologize. That does not appear to be something I can fix at this moment. So let's talk about language proficiency. Now that we've learned about the Common European Framework of Reference, and we've begun to understand how that works, let's look at how the Council of Europe and the Common European Framework of Reference define language proficiency, or how do I know if my student has really learned English? And this is what's very interesting. When the Common European Framework of Reference was first published in 2001, it included this quote: "Communication is an integral part of the task where participants engage in interaction, production, reception, and mediation, or a combination of 2 or more of these." Now, here is something that's quite interesting that not a lot of people are aware of. Interaction, production, reception, and mediation are the 4 skills of the Common European Framework of Reference. And I'm going to give you a little more explanation of what that means. So let's take a look. So with the Common European Framework of Reference, they essentially look at English language on a very large process that our learners will go through that incorporates different types of proficiency. First, we have communicative language proficiency. This is the general competencies that our students need to have, the declarative knowledge like the sky is blue or the tree is green. It's the skills and the know-how. I know how to form a sentence. I know how to engage with someone else to buy a sombrero. If I want to buy a sombrero, maybe I have to use a little English and Spanish, but I can get that done. It's existential competence, or how you act and communicate with others. So your knowledge and awareness of yourself as a speaker and who you're communicating with, and also the activities that we use to learn. So everything that we do to learn is considered a communicative language proficiency. Then we have communicative language competencies. So for those of you who love teaching grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation, a lot of that is linguistic competence. So this is where we're supporting our linguistic, the linguistic side of learning. Then we have pragmatic, how we interact in situations, reading emotions, body language, and also social linguistic principles, understanding the cultures that we're interacting and how those are different. I imagine even in Latin America, if you speak Spanish and you go from Costa Rica to Guatemala, even though the language is the same, the culture is probably pretty different. And you might need to change a little the type of Spanish that you use or the specific words that you're using to communicate. The same is true in English. If I am coming from Chicago and speaking to someone from Japan who speaks English, I still have to be aware of the cultural background of the person I'm communicating with. So that's our social linguistic competence. And then finally, we get into the communicative language and active strategies. And this is where you find reception, production, interaction, and mediation. And as I said, these are the 4 skills of the CEFR. Now, how many of you know the 4 skills of English? Who can type that into the chat for me? We have 4 skills in English. I'm sure we all know those. I'm going to open up this chat box again. I see I missed some messages here. How are we doing? Uh-oh, come on, go down to messages. There we go. So Zoom has decided it does not want to interact with me today. Let's see. All right. Come on. It's because you're all so excited in the chat. I can't get it to go down to the new messages. How funny is that? All right, so we'll leave those messages alone. I have a feeling, given how quickly that's happening, that hopefully you're saying listening, speaking, reading, and writing. I'm going to try to get this to pop up on my screen. There we are. I see Vivian first. So I'm going to, Vivian, you're at the end, but you're the beginning for me because you're the first person I saw. But I see Edwin, Juan, Hazel, Celine, Erica, so many different people. Great. Listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Can you tell me then, in the communicative language category, where does listening, speaking, reading, and writing live? Is it reception, production, interaction, or mediation? Where is listening, speaking, reading, and writing? All right, I'm going to see if we can get this to work. So we know the 4 skills of English are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Where do they fit in the communicative language? Who can tell me the answer? All right, I see Edwin, production. Production, definitely going to have listening and, or not listening. Well, we'll definitely have some things in production. I see Yahara, interaction, right? We might have some listening, speaking, reading, and writing and interaction. I see Hugh Chan saying all of these things. And if you're thinking listening, I need listening to receive information. I need reading to receive information. Those are our receptive skills. Production, speaking, I need speaking to produce information and share it out loud, or I need writing to produce information and share it out loud. So there is my speaking and writing skill. However, for interaction, I need to listen to what people are saying to me and respond to them. That's interactive speaking. Or just like in my text box right now, you're writing messages to me. This is all production and I am speaking to you. So that's also interaction. So interaction also contains listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And then we have mediation. And I think you're starting to see the theme I'm going for here. Mediation also includes listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And this is how we really wrap up all of the communicative skills. So when we think about learning, you'll definitely have speaking, listening, reading, and writing, but interaction and mediation, how we use those skills to engage with others, that is a piece that has not often been very well detailed from the CEFR. So I'm going to give you some information on how we can do that. And I see Juan Carlos, this is a really wonderful explanation. He says mediation, or somehow all of them are needed for mediation, especially when a problem arises. And you are 100% correct, Juan Carlos. Mediation is how we negotiate problems, how we negotiate meaning, and how we maintain communication with each other. So we're going to really unpack what that means. Let's take a look at this. Online interaction and mediation. Well, interaction. That's pretty easy. You may have noticed you're doing a lot of online interaction in our chat box right now. Online interaction, it's where the learner is participating and engaging in meaning. And interaction is more than just A says, hello, B says, how are you? A says, I'm fine, thank you. And you, B says, I'm fine, thank you. That's not interaction. That's practicing for interaction. That's building our skills. Think about the conversations you have with your students, or think about the conversations you have with other teachers or your friends. Sometimes you know what to say. Sometimes you have to listen for a lot of that information and think before you can interact. So with interaction, it's really a combination of how do I engage with another human being, not just using an A, B, A, B, A, B type response. So really when we get into interaction, it's the kind of interaction you're doing inside of the chat box right now, where you're sharing out information, asking questions, answering questions, and engaging with each other. That's all interaction. Here's another example of interaction for speaking. So perhaps I have a student, here's my friend, and I can point to something and say, did you see that? And they say, yes, see, I see the stars. That's a perfectly correct answer. But that wasn't the information I was looking for. And I might tell my friend, no, it's a constellation. But if my friend has never experienced that word before, they need to interact with me. And they may do this, where they're going to interact to try to unpack, what is a constellation? So you might say, ¿qué es una constelación? Or maybe you say, ¿cómo se dice constelación en español? What is a constellation? I don't understand what that is. This is just an example, so perhaps I don't get it. And I might say to my friend, you know constellations like Lo Oso Mayor. And then my friend will be like, oh yes, I do see the constellation. This is all about interacting, engaging, and negotiating meaning. And in English language learning, this doesn't all take place in English. Often we will go back and forth between our L1 or our native language and our L2, the language we're learning. And in this case, L2 would be English. So this is one way that we can think of interaction. You're already doing this online, and I want to get to the really interesting subject, which is mediation. Interaction is a little bit easier. Mediation is slightly more complex. So mediation means creating a space where you can really begin to co-create and negotiate meaning. And a lot of this you've already been doing in the chat today, as you've been reading through, answering questions, sharing information about your classrooms, responding to me. We're all working together to co-create meaning. And there are three aspects of mediation. We mediate to manage conversations, manage a group, manage an interaction inside of a meeting. We mediate to co-construct new meaning or understand new concepts. And finally, we mediate to process information that is written down. Now, I want to help clarify this, so I do have some examples. And there are three, again, specific skills of mediation. So let's take a look at all of these. In fact, at the very beginning of the session, when you were picking your groups, you were actually focusing on an aspect of mediation that you feel quite comfortable with. Mediating communication, that's helping to manage the discussion. If there's miscommunication, if someone doesn't understand something, helping to answer questions, or if someone's getting a little upset, maybe helping to calm them down. All of that is mediating communication. The next part of mediation is mediating concepts. Mediating concepts is collaboration strategies, how you work together with other people. Mediating concepts also includes cognitive strategies. It's how you think about information to solve problems, but then how you share that information with others to communicate and co-create new meaning and new concepts. And the final aspect of mediation here is where we mediate the text. And as you can see, mediating the text is an integrated skill activity where you will absolutely use production, reception, interaction, and mediation to help support and understand meaning. That will be your summarizing, relaying info, and explaining charts and graphs. And this is all part of mediating the text. One of the most interesting aspects of mediation, though, is that it incorporates L1. So when we're using mediation in our classroom, if you're in a country where Spanish is the first language, or the L1, you might actually be using some L1 with your students to help them get to L2. And I'm just going to pause there. How many of you are shocked that I just said it's okay to use Spanish in your classroom to teach English? I know that's a very contentious sort of topic in our industry. So we're going to get in here and see what are people saying. I'm opening up the chat. My chat is really slowing down because there are so many people talking. But again, thank you. Akora, thank you for answering that question. That was or asking the question, and Gabriella for answering it. Great. All right, so we're okay with Spanish in the classroom. I don't see anybody complaining. But if you do have something to say about that, Hugh says, yes, I do use Spanish to teach English. Great. Anyone else use a lot of Spanish? Elvia, you feel very, it's useful when students are anxious. I absolutely agree. Using our native language can help calm our students and reduce their anxiety and their affective filter in the classroom. Rita says she uses a mix. Diego, only when necessary to clarify or when I'm mad. It's a very honest answer. I do appreciate an honest answer. I used to use a lot of L2 in my classroom when I got mad, so I totally understand that. Helen's found it helpful. Natalie tries not to. And there are many teachers who really prefer to avoid using Spanish in the classroom or using any kind of L1 in the classroom. So let's take a look at how we can do this to support language learning and hopefully give you some ideas of how to do this with your students. So we've been talking about mediation. This is one of the skills of English. I have a little activity that we're going to do here very quickly. On the bottom of the screen, you can see our 3 different areas. We have mediating communication, which is managing the conversation, mediating concepts, which is helping to come to new ideas, and mediating the text, which is about processing the text. I'm about to show you a video. And what I want you to do as you watch the video is answer the question, what kind of mediation are you seeing on the screen? Is everybody ready? I'm looking for those yeses. I love a good yes. Yeses are my favorite. All right. I think we're ready to go. All right. So what kind of mediation is it? Is it mediating communication, mediating concepts, or mediating the text? Let's take a look. And hopefully this will work. This is the first time I've done this in Zoom. Mark, cross your fingers.
Sorry, Sarah, we're unable to hear you right now.
No, now we can't.
Now we go. Now we got you.
Now we can hear me? All right.
Yes, yes,
Oh.
we can hear you.
All right, so as you can see right now, just in this interaction, I am mediating communication between Mark and Jonathan while I'm also trying to mediate communication between my computer and this video. So there's an awful lot of mediation going on right now. And I think I see Catherine and Diera and Erica, Rita, Diana, Yara, all saying that this is in fact mediating communication. And if you saw that, that is correct. For anyone who could not hear the sound, what's happening here is she is being accused of doing something wrong, specifically stealing or using some counterfeit money. She doesn't speak any French, and only he can help us bridge the gap. This officer speaks French. This officer speaks French and German. He speaks German and Spanish. He speaks Spanish and English. And so they are mediating communication all the way down until they can communicate to Lucy, who is at the end. And of course, she's very unhappy because she doesn't understand what's going on. The reason I like to use this video for mediation is to show you that this is not a new concept in English language learning and teaching, and really not even a new concept in the history of communication. This video is 64 years old. We have been doing mediation for a long time. So mediation is actually really, really useful and extremely important in creating and co-creating meaning. And if you want to look this up on YouTube later, you're looking for I Love Lucy, down the line of translation, and I do recommend it. It's a lot of fun. All right, so we're going to go on to some objectives, and I want to show you some ways that you can use this in the classroom now that we know how kind of an idea of what that can look like. And here we're going to see how we can do this. So using the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit, we can actually go through and look up objectives to use for mediation in the classroom. And I actually have a few of those objectives here that are somehow not on my screen. So we'll just go ahead and go through and I'll show you how this works because I think I lost the slide. So when we're mediating in the classroom and you're thinking to yourself, well, how do I do this Spanish and English, or maybe you're just using English, but you have students at lots of different levels of ability. Let's take a look at what this might look like. There are 4 activities that I find to be really useful for this, and we'll go through 3 of these today. One is a think, pair, share. Most of you have probably used something like a think, pair, share before. This is where your student thinks, you pair together, and then we share out. The next one is information gaps. This is where we may have an A-B pattern, and we're sharing that information out together. And finally, a jigsaw activity where you may have students who have different information and one or more of them have that information. So I think just for the sake of time, we may not have time to do some of these activities online today. I did set this up so that we could do it online, but I think we're running out of time and I don't want to overwork that. So for a think, pair, share, again, this is a pair activity, but you can do it in groups. You provide information. It could be video, an audio, your textbook, something you're telling your students, the presentation on the board. You're going to allow some time for your students to think about that information, and then they need to speak. So perhaps in your classroom, this might look something like this. So on the screen, I have 2 cards. I have A's and I have B's. And I want you to take a look, read this information. You will notice something very quickly. This information is not in English. So hopefully that's the first thing you see. And in the classroom, what I would ask my students to do is to take some time. I'll give them about 5 minutes. And what I want them to do is get as much information in their head as that they can get. So read it in Spanish, think about it in Spanish. What are the important points that you need to communicate from this small story? I give my students about 5 minutes to read, then I have them turn the paper over, or I even collect the paper from my students so they can't refer back to the card. And then in the group, I have everyone talk together, and the goal is share the key ideas from the reading in English, in whatever way you need to do it. You might have to say some words in Spanish in order to communicate it, but your partner can help you by translating that into English. If you can't remember the word, you can use gestures to help communicate it. It's okay to read it in Spanish, but you have to communicate that out in English. This is a great mediation activity, and this just uses that think, pair, share. This is the beginning of a jigsaw, because I'll have an A group where all of the students are student A, and they all read that together and discuss it at their table. And my students B, they're all reading together and discussing that at their table. And then I might have A and B come together, and now they still have to share the key ideas and important information, but now they're doing it with 2 different points of information. So this is really big mediation inside of the classroom. So that's a quick think, pair, share activity. We can also do information gaps. I think you'll really like this. This is where student A has some information, student B has some information. But in this information gap activity, there's a twist. I have a student C, and student C has the information my A and B students need. Unfortunately, student C's information is in L1, so A and B have to work together to translate it into English, but they can't translate, they just have to think and write. So let me show you what this looks like. Here you can see at the top of the screen, I want to point this out, I forgot when I was speaking here. You can see the objective for mediation, and here what I want my students to do is to interact, to collaborate, and to seek information on concepts. So again, oh no, what happened now? That's very exciting. My computer has just gone black. Okay, there we go. We're just going to keep going. So we have our A. I want my A student to answer these questions. What were the sales like for shirts in 2019? And how have sales of hats changed between 2018 and 2020? Student B has to answer these questions. What were the sales like for dresses in 2018 and 2019? And how have the sales of pants changed between 2018 and 2019? Student C needs to read the answers to their partners. And here is the chart that student C has. And you'll notice something about this chart. This is just a basic graph. Some of that information is there in Spanish, but there's no other supporting information. And so my student C has to really think and mediate. They answer the questions, they can answer in Spanish. Student A and B, they have to think in English, oh, what does that mean? And how can I write down that information? So here, again, my students are using both L1 and L2 They're working together to co-collaborate and create meaning, and they're processing a text to understand more information about that. And then when they're finished, I like to have them do this little bit of a thing. So if I'm doing this online as an online activity and all of my students are typing in chat, or maybe they're having a group conversation, I can actually have them cut and paste the answers from C, but then they have to compare and summarize everything in their own words in English. And I can also have C, since A and B have an activity, they need to review the chart and also summarize this in English because they've been working in Spanish. So this is a little information gap activity with a lot of English language mediation. And my final little activity for you today is a jigsaw. A jigsaw, you've done this before in your classroom. You give your students letters like A, B, C, D, and then you say A's together, B's together, C's together, D's together. So this is rearranging our students in the classroom to get them to work in groups together. In this jigsaw activity, this is a little special, and you'll please note this is a B1 level activity, so a bit more complicated. And what I can have my students do here is they're going to summarize in English the main points of text in language A, but this needs to be of familiar or personal interest. So for this activity, I've selected 3 different articles that my students can read online. And if you'd like to use this activity later, and I'm going to try to do this, I'm having technical difficulties all the time. Please let me know, did my computer open up? No, it did not. All right, let's try this again. Zoom is just having a lot of fun with Sara today. All right, can you see my browser? All right, I'm seeing some Y's, good. So these are the 3 stories I've chosen. Today, I'm sure many of you are paying attention to the news. You know that racial justice and racial inequality are very big topics all around the world right now. So for this activity, I've chosen 3 stories in Spanish, and my students can read any of these 3 stories in the classroom. And I have pasted the links into this presentation, so when you get this later, you can actually take a look and find these stories if you'd like to use this activity. Now I'm going to go back to my presentation, hopefully. Let me know if you can't see it, and hopefully I can see that, or Mark will let me know, I'm sure. So the first thing I'll ask my students to do is to read those articles, and then we're going to have a group discussion. And you can do this in your online Zoom classes. You can have your students come prepared before class, they read the article, and when they come to your online class, you're going to have a discussion. You'll invite your students to come off mute, maybe 1 by 1, or maybe 2 at a time. And what we want to do is to share the information. Now remember, those 3 articles are in Spanish. Very complicated topic. A lot of really detailed information in Spanish. Then answering the questions, we're going to talk about them in English. This is really going to push my students to a new level of progress because they're really thinking about a subject that I have a feeling is very important to many, many of our students right now. And now they also have an opportunity to talk about it in a structured way. And because they were able to read the articles in Spanish first, they might have some even bigger ideas and more information to share in their English conversation because they've had more time to think about the topics in their L1. So this is a jigsaw activity that you can do. I like to, and because all of my students had different readings, this is how we can do an online jigsaw, even if I can't pair my students up in those A, B, C, D types of groups. So that is another way to do this. So this is how we can develop skills for our long-term fluency. And I think at this time, if I haven't messed my timing up, we're about to get into our next activity, which is to give you some time to think about the concepts that you've been discussing on our webinar today, and to engage a little bit more for that. Are we ready for that, Mark?
Yes, we are. Jonathan's going to give us a little instructions first.
All right, great. Thank you. I turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you. Yes, people, we are going to be working on breakout rooms. The idea is that we are going to be dividing up this session into smaller collaborative groups so you can discuss what Sara has been sharing with us today. The idea is that you can apply these concepts that we are being exposed to your personal teaching contexts and see how, for example, these things can be applied. Obviously, as soon as we get into the breakout rooms, the possibility to open your microphones is there, and we also encourage you to please Not only use your microphone, but also, you know, turn on your camera so you know who you're talking to. And the usual thing as well, people, please do follow the conference etiquette guidelines. So that is, you know, like, let's try to be nice, open-minded, and obviously try to be human because all of us can make mistakes. Okay, so Mark, so I guess you can divide up the class now and we can go into smaller groups.
Excellent. So we have the breakout rooms ready to go. Sarah, did you want to give them any final instructions before we open?
Sure. My final instruction, when you're in the breakout room, I'd like you, I'm going to put my screen up, and Mark has prepared a link to share this out. I've selected just one of the activities, but we saw 3 activities today: that think, pair, share in Spanish, the information gap with the chart in Spanish, and then our final jigsaw activity with the 3 newspaper articles in Spanish. In your breakout rooms, I just want you to think about all of these activities and how are they going to help your students improve their English. And if you have time, why? Why is this important? And do you want to do it? Is this going to help you and your students? So during your breakout session, please think about these mediation strategies, the activities you just saw, and share. How are you going to use this and how will this help your students in the future? People are having great conversations. Excellent. If you had a good conversation, if you learned something nice, do feel free to talk about that in that chat box. I'm going to read it in just one second because I'll ask for your questions. But the final thing that I wanted to leave you with today was a quote from a friend of mine and also from the author of the Common European Framework of Reference, whose name is Dr. Brian North. And he worked with the Council of Europe to help create the original CEFR and also to publish the update, which happened in 2017. I actually have a link to a webinar that he did, or not a webinar, a live session that you can watch at home. And one of the things that he said really resonated me because he made it very clear that as English language teachers, we have an extremely difficult job. Not only are we expected to teach English, but we teach English in English. The goal, the objective of our students is also the language that we're using to communicate to our students. And the way that he described it was like this: language is the vehicle of communication and it is access to all knowledge. And as teachers, as English language teachers, we are expected not only to deliver communication, but also to deliver accessibility to knowledge. We have a really big job as English language teachers, and I want to leave you with that little quote. We're going to go ahead and move on to questions, but I just want to let everyone know I do have a section of resources which will give you some additional videos, as well as some articles that you can read on mediation and how to use this inside of your classroom. And now I'm going to take a look at this chat box for questions, and I think we're going to start opening it up and letting people come off mute and engage us. So I'm going to get this chat box going. I'm going to stop talking and see if we can find a question here. All right. Come on, chat box. This chat box does not like me.
There were some questions that I was writing down for you to take
Perfect.
a look at.
Because I don't
Yes.
think I'm going to be able to see them.
No, it's like, again, like there were too many different things and comments but there was one question that obviously stood out from the things that were being mentioned, and that is like, is there any way that we can minimize the plateau?
To minimize the plateau, yes. To minimize the plateau, what I recommend doing is what we call teaching inside of the zone of proximal development. How many of you have heard that term before, ZPD? It's very common now, we hear it a lot. Some of us in English language teaching, if you've never heard of zone of proximal development before, you may have heard of I+1, or input plus challenge, which comes from Dr. Stevens Krashen's theory of natural language acquisition. So I'll very quickly, I'm gonna, hopefully we can all still see my screen. I appreciate my tech support helping me out with this. I mentioned earlier the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. You can find this, by the way, at english.com/GSE. I'll say that one more time. I know it's hard to remember. English.com. That's it. That's the website, english.com/GSE. And for teaching in the zone, let's say that my students are currently in A2 and they're plateauing. They're not making any progress. And perhaps they're my young learners, and I'm teaching them reading. I think we've all had this problem sometimes with our students with reading, especially young learners. Currently, they're right here. They're inside of the A2 box, but they're not making progress. They're just plateauing. So in order to get them out of that box, I need to push a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is to open my ruler up. What I want to see is what comes after 36, because I want to make a little progress. Not big, just little 3 points, not too far away from where my students currently are. When you click the show results button, now you can see only reading skills. So you should see reading skills on your screen. Notice there are 28. And this is how I make sure my students keep making progress. I read through the skills and I think, yes, my students can follow instructions for feedback on a computer game. My students can understand the main themes of a simplified story. My students can follow, no, wait, my students can't do this. My students cannot follow a simple series of written instructions to carry out a task. I'm going to put a check. I'm going to keep reading. And as I read through, again, just 28, it's a pretty short list. I will read and I'm going to look for things my students cannot do. When you teach your students something that they cannot do, that is how you ensure that they keep making progress and push them through the plateau. And you'll notice that I checked those boxes. I can even download my selection. I can select all 28 if I want to as an Excel sheet, so I can review this on my computer, and then I can copy and paste the correct objectives into my lesson plan so that I can keep helping my students make progress as they move forward. So that is the best way to help your students break through the plateau, give them a challenge, not where they're at, but just above what they can do. We're looking for the thing they cannot do yet, but I know I can teach it to them. Next questions, what do we got?
Yeah, there was another one in which, obviously, when you were showing the scale for the Zephyr, we have A1 plus, A2 plus, B1 plus, B2 plus. But the question is much more connected to the fact that why is it that we have no plus when we're talking about the C?
Oh, it's a great question. So the plus levels are all about time. And what we discovered, we've actually done some research on the CEFR. And one of the things that's very much true is that there is what we call a bell curve. So if you're familiar with language learning theory, you understand that learning is a distribution that looks a bit like a bell. This is consistent. It's always supposed to happen. And in English, the bell starts at A2, continues up over B1, B1 plus over the top of B2, B2 plus, and then it comes down. And so what happens is the plus levels are there to help us provide some additional information as students are inside of that bell. But what happens is once students exit B2, they don't hit as much of a curve. That progression is actually a bit smaller because once you get to that advanced level, there's not much more to learn after you get to C1. Additionally, C1 tends to cover really challenging, very difficult language. In fact, you will not find C1 very often for young learners. You'll mostly find C1 for academic learners. And I'm going to show you, this is what C1 looks like. So you'll see it is very technical. This is, we tend to consider this specialized language. Oops, I broke the teacher toolkit and we're all watching it. So don't tell my boss. He might get mad at me. Okay, here we go. So here, no, those are B. I want only C. Let's see, we can choose this, not the skill. Come on, computer. Play with Sarah, do your job. All right, choose our range. I want only the C1 range. That one, not that one. No, go away. You guy. There we go. All right, here we go. I'm just having a technical difficulty afternoon. So here you can see C1 level skills. Contribute to a group discussion if it's fast and colloquial. Recognizing ideas that are parallel in a linguistically complex text. Discussing illustrations in an academic text. Making jokes using jokes in writing using words with similar spellings but different meanings. That's actually kind of a C1 level skill, although we can usually teach it a little earlier with simple words. Identifying logical flaws in a presentation, citing academic resources. So as you can see, C1 level skills, they're usually very concentrated, very specific, and very focused on advanced English. we generally tend to see that most of our students will complete their English language journey around the B1 plus B2 area. And I can tell you that to enter into a university, most universities are looking for students who are at minimum around here at that B1 plus low B2 space. So this is often where students are accepted directly as direct admission into universities. And then they will achieve B2 and B2 plus quite quickly. So B2 plus is really where our academic career, then they might even move into some more C1 level English, but B2 plus is often our end goal.
Yeah, there is another question, something that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation,
Okay.
which was like, if you can share the document for homework in which you stated that there is like the amount of hours that should be invested in language development.
Absolutely, I can do it right now. So in fact, if you go to english.com/GSE, that will take you over here to this lovely little website. This is my Global Scale of English website. You can get our toolkit right here. You'll find that information. But one of the things that you will find right here is called Research and Expertise. And if you click on the link for Research and Expertise, this will actually allow you to download our paper. And this is the paper. I'm going to show it to you now. I'll also paste the link into the chat. So if you want to just go ahead and download it right now on the chat, if I can get that chat to open, it's a very cranky with Sara. So you can see this is my paper on how long it takes to learn a language. And it will give you a lot of information. One thing to understand with the learning languages, it's not a one track. There are actually two different tracks to learning English. We have what we call our sort of fast track, where a student is really studying very intensely. And then we have our slower track, where maybe our student can only study English once or maybe only 2 or 3 hours a week. So depending on what your study intensity looks like, you may have a faster or slower acquisition track. And if your study intensity changes, maybe you were on the fast track, but then you only started studying 1 hour a week, then your length of time is going to change as well. So I just posted that link in the chat, and everyone can go there and download this paper right now. So if you can get that.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, basically, we don't have any more time for any other question. So on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, we want to thank you for your presentation today and for your willingness to share your time and to contribute to the success of our online event. So people, all those of us who are here, can we give her a warm virtual applause, please?